Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing marvelously well. I'm very excited because we're going to hang out for an hour or so with our good friend, Mr. David Frangioni, who, of course, you probably know as, well, he is the owner of Modern Drummer magazine. He's a world-class engineer and a world-class drummer and a good friend of mine. David, how the devil are you?
I'm doing great, Ward. It's great to be here, everyone. Hello from Frangioni Media Studios in South Florida.
South Florida. I haven't been to your home yet, so I actually don't know where in South Florida you might be located. Where are you?
We're in Boca Raton.
Oh, wow. I've actually heard of it.
Yeah. Yeah, in between Palm Beach and Fort Lauderdale.
Lovely. My wife has family out there, so I know roughly the area. That's rather lovely. So this is your own studio.
Yes.
It looks like you've got, I'm guessing, an immersive system going on there. Either that or you've accidentally got some Genelec sitting behind you.
All right. No, we certainly do have an Atmos studio, and we're here 724 studio, do a lot of mixing in immersive. And this studio, it's primarily a mix room and a production room. There is no live room corresponding to it. It's strictly a control room. But it's the evolution of having a home studio for, well over 30 years, close to 40. That's why there's so much what I would call world-class outboard gear, because I've amassed it over the decades, and some of these really great pieces don't make sense to sell, because even if I just use them once in a while, it makes a difference, and it really helps, the music. I wouldn't have bought them if I started today.
Yeah.
But because this studio has been going on for so long, and even though it's moved locations, the gear has stayed intact. So here we are. It's a very modern studio, and it is very well outfitted. But when the viewers see what the combination is of hybrid hardware to software, the majority of the hardware has just been a collection of what I consider really great pieces over the decades.
No, it's fantastic. I know exactly what you mean. I feel very similarly about it. I wouldn't go and rebuy a lot of the stuff I have, but I wouldn't sell it. But what's interesting is when we moved studio to the new place, we did get rid of the SSL and then ended up getting another console. So it was like
I always wanted an SSL console, that was like the dream. And because I love working on them, and I've worked with them so much at so many different studios, but I always wanted one in my own home studio. But then the console era for my needs kind of went by, and I went with this S6 as a Surface. I had a D-Control before that, so I made the shift in the early 2000s to a control surface, and then just look to inside the box for the SSL sounds. And I have essentially what you call 500 series racks with SSL modules in them, and that combination kind of got me there. But that's to me, that's just it just got such a great sound.
Yeah, absolutely. I do miss the way we would mix through SSLs. It became like a huge template, to be quite blunt. It was great. It was a 4,000, was actually a 4 or 6,000. That's a long story, but it was a template. We would end up putting, all the drums through it. We had access to hardware coming in on the insert, and immediately it would come up sounding amazing straight off the bat. However, recallability, even though it was fully recallable, it was nowhere near as quick as doing it, just by opening up your Pro Tools session or whatever DAW you're in. So I do like the idea of this sort of blended world of working in a hybrid, but also having a console for the access to the outboard. That's what I like about it. I'm bringing it through a channel, and I've got all the inserts and the sends and everything. Yeah. I don't know. I love the feel of it. Isn't it nice to have faders and stuff?
Yeah, well, the S6 brings that, but there's no question that, it's a different workflow. And when I had my first home studio, which was really just some gear in my house, right, where we all start. I don't even know. At first, it had a modest control room, and then I built it out and brought, some great people in to help me at that time when I was just coming out of my teens. to really get it right and get the room accurate and have a proper studio in my house. At that time, when I look back, I didn't realize the importance and the technique behind workflow, like how it really impacts, what you're able to create and how fast you're able to create it. And so as the years have gone on, I've looked at the equipment and I've looked at the application, and I've looked at what is the fastest and most efficient workflow for how I work. And it speaks to exactly what you're referring to. Like when you have the console, you come up with, hey, this is how I'm going to get sounds the fastest, regardless of what drum kit comes in or what drummer plays on the drum kit that's mic'd up, regardless of what other configurations there are with the artist. Like, this is how I'll work the absolute fastest and get the end result I want, both in sound and the feel and all of these elements that come to to produce what ultimately people will hear. And it's workflow. So I have to have faders as part of that workflow. Of course, we can adapt to whatever we have to deal with. And if I'm on a laptop and that's all I've got, I can get by. But having my own studio, I can put whatever I want in it, right? What's going to be the best workflow? And faders for me are an absolute must. And I love the S6. When I came out of the D Control, I was thinking about, what do I do an S4? Do I do an S6? And what are the differences? And, what's going to be ultimately, the fastest and best way to go. And the modularity and the configuration, flexibility of the S6 ultimately, put me into that decision. And I had some great people advising me and kind of brainstorming, Gil Gowing from Avid and Mike Peacock from Sweetwater. And we all put our heads together and just looked at all the options and came up with, essentially a 32 channel S6 with surround panner, which is, really nice to have, especially mixing as much immersive as I'm doing. And then all of these little outboard controllers, which, I always loved, like I still have, as you'll see in the videos here that we're sharing with people from my studio. I've got a 480L and a 960 and a TC6000 and some of these, what I would consider iconic outboard gear, high-end effects units. And the controller that, the Lark and the Lark 2 as examples, that really is just such a creatively interactive way of dialing in what you want. So I love having these little, like this is my 2290, the TC made, from the plug-in, and, just USB. And when I'm dialing in a 2290, it just feels like when I had 2290s over the years, right? We don't have a physical one here now, but we have one in the box, and this just kind of completes, again, workflow.
You've never seen that. I love that. That is fantastic.
Oh, it's awesome. And we have one for the 2210.
Yeah, we have one as well. It's been so long since we used it. I had to go to Eric and go, we have one. He goes, I think so. Yeah.
So we've got a whole batch of them that we're sharing, with everyone today that you'll see. That the 250 and the 1210, which is one of my favorite chorus units of all time, and the 8210 and the SSL, et cetera, and the, it's just awesome.
So, David, we bonded over the fact that we both worked with Aerosmith. That was the first thing. I think my album I did with them now is actually 12 years ago. It seems like the other day that I did it, but it was 12 years ago.
Music from another dimension. Great job.
Thank you. What was the record or records that you did? Was it the two predecessors to that or three?
No, it was, it started at the tail end of Pump going into the Pump tour, which is when I first got on board with them. And then I stayed through the 90s into the early 2000s. I think when we look at the records that I worked on, the singles, the movies, and the greatest hits, and when you add it all together, I think it's about 9 albums in total. I was basically their in-house guy. I don't want to just say engineer because it was more vast than that. We were doing a lot of computer recording and programming and Pro Tools and Performer and just all various things. But I was like the in-house day-to-day guy, typically at Joe Perry's studio, the Boneyard, sometimes at Stevens. And then I helped all of them build out their studios. So each of the guys, so Brad, Tom, and Joey, in addition to Steven and Joe, they all had studios for a period of time there. At that time when it started, at Joe's studio, we had a 24-track Otari 2-inch. And then we went to, then we augmented it with a computer, and then, which was just running MIDI software. And then we added an ADAT and D88s at some point, and then Pro Tools was later. And so there was a period when all the band members, when I built their studios, that they were all kind of exchanging ideas. At that time was ADATs that you would exchange, tracks on. It's hard to believe, but that's how we worked. And then that migrated to Pro Tools. And by the end of the 90s, the ADATs had been replaced pretty much with everyone having Pro Tools. And then that was the tool of choice from then on. But those records and that experience, my role that I had with the band was such an unbelievable learning experience, and was such an incredible part of that time of my career.
Where were you living? Were you living out in Duxbury and all that kind of area? Or?
I was living in Boston, which the town I was in was not even a city. It was called Arlington, which is where I grew up. And that was about an hour. Yeah, I grew up in Arlington, Mass, suburb of Boston. And, I got connected with first Tom Hamilton from Aerosmith, the bass player. He was actually the person that called me in the band and asked me to help him with his home, really kind of rig more than a studio. It was Master Tracks Pro at the time with a Tascam that he was using to record tracks. And the Master Tracks was chasing it so he could do MIDI. And, it was a nice songwriting setup. And then he was really... No, it was before he moved to the Cape. He was in Chestnut Hill. Yep, he was in Chestnut Hill at the time, and right near Natick. And then he introduced me. He was happy with the work that he and I were doing together, and he brought me into the band. He introduced me to them, and it was something I'll forever be grateful to him for. He's still a dear friend to this day, and I really appreciate. It was almost a very mentored way that he brought me in. Because I was so young. I mean, remember, Warren, I'm like 21 at this time. And I'd already started to build my career locally in Boston and get some things happening and get some good credits. But this was an opportunity that, was really a dream come true, quite frankly. And when he brought me in, he said, look, I'm going to introduce you to the band, and I'm going to explain to them what you do. And then it's on you. It's not. So he was saying in a very nice way, like almost like a fatherly figure, like, I'm going to give you a shot, but you're the one who's going to take it. And if you don't make something of this, then okay, then that's how it goes, and you're not ready, or we're not ready, or whatever. And, but if you do make something of it, then it's on you as well. And he made the intro. Well, I ended up connecting really well with Steven and then subsequently Joe. And we kind of, from the first day that I met the band, it was one of those things where I kind of never left. Like, it worked so well that it just kind of went like, oh, okay, can you come back tomorrow? And then, oh, can you come back the next day? And, then within a relatively short period of time, I have a role as opposed to kind of being auditioned. And then, fortunately at that time, 89-ish through the early 2000s, Just Push Play being my last, what I call new release record that I worked on with them. That whole period, they were very active, and they were touring a lot. They were doing a ton of singles and edits and songs for movies. And at that time, the cutting edge gaming world would be, pinball machines and CD-ROM games. And then it kind of migrated and evolved to Guitar Hero. So this is all pre-internet, really, for the most part. But my point is that it just gave me experience in all these different lanes, because what started out as, okay, we'll have you as our guy in the studio. And when, every day you show up and we'll come in, we'll write songs, we'll do edits, we'll do radio spots, like whatever we need to do, because it was always something, really turned into a much bigger role. And it was still just me for a lot of that. Then some other guys came in, later on in the process. I moved to South Florida, and I was commuting to work with them, but they had local guys that were doing essentially what I was doing at that time and stepped in. And it was actually two guys. I was going between Steven and Joe's. And then when I moved to South Florida, they put one guy at Joe's and one guy at Steven's. So I think it kind of shows like how much was really going on that I was handling. And it was awesome because of the experience that I gained and how many different things I learned. And that's how you really can improve your skill set, right? It's like on the job, on the battlefield. And they always say the map and the terrain never match. And that's how you, I think, really can learn and grow.
I agree entirely. Yeah. I presume you were friends. And I obviously I didn't meet him because unfortunately he died. It was Paul, wasn't it? Joe's.
Paul Caruso.
Paul Caruso. Yeah, Joe.
Yeah, that was Joe's guy. Yep.
Yeah.
He came in when I moved to South Florida. Also a drummer.
Oh, I didn't know.
And a good guy that did a great job. And, part of it is you got to have the skill set. And part of it is that you have to have the chemistry, with Joe and with the band and the team. And I had that and Paul had that. And there was another person who I think he might even still work with the band, Paul Santos. And he was, Paul Santos was Steven's, camp, if you will. It was all Aerosmith, but he was at Steven's house and he would go to Joe's, and Paul was at Joe's house and he would go wherever was needed. But it was really an amazing time. There was just so much going on. Mike Shipley, God bless him, who I became friends with and was an inspiration of mine as a mixing engineer and as a professional. And then I got to know him personally because he came down and mixed Just Push Play. And that was kind of being the last real original Aerosmith record before the one that you did, before Music from Another Dimension, which, that was a long period of time. It was like 15-year span almost. So that was kind of
because they did Honkin' on Bobo in between, which
was a blues record, and they did all kinds of greatest hits and live things. But original records, there was a long gap, and it Just Push Play, because this home studio, quote unquote, in each of their worlds kept growing and growing and growing. By the time Just Push Play happened, we had multiple Pro Tool systems at Joe Perry's studio, and Joe got the house next door to him and put an SSL in it, which I think was a rental, but regardless, it was an SSL in it. And Mike came down and mixed on that SSL and we were bringing, at that time, it was removable hard drives. I think Rourke Data and Glyph Tech.
Swappable. Yes, I remember that.
Right. Hot swappable, SCSI drives.
And they weren't hot swappable at all, were they? You could never.
Not really. You have to be real careful, and you would be
SCSI drives.
You'd be in a hot mess. And we would take the drives back and forth and bring them over to the SSL studio and then back to the Pro Tool studio. I mean, it was archaic by today's standards and the way that files can move and the speed and the safety that files can move today. But then it was really cutting edge, and that's how we did Just Push Play. And so they were making tweaks to the mix and to the production even right up till the last minute. And that was one of the most intense and thorough experiences I ever had of free, all digital, all DAW, all virtual world that we've been in now for, a good 15 years. But before that, that was kind of the pinnacle of how do you work in real time and not have this division of the recording pre-production, the recording process, the production process, the mixing process, the mastering process, everything very segregated, because it wasn't so easy to kind of cross those boundaries just from a technology standpoint and everything else. And here we were, in the late 90s, early 2000s, before any of that was mainstream as it is today, and we were doing it, but look at what it took. We had multiple heavyweight Pro Tools systems and an SSL console with Mike Shipley and the whole team at Joe's, and we had hot swappable drives, and it was just like, it was so cumbersome by today's standards, but we were able to, even though it doesn't compare to today, what we were able to do then, and this was very eye-opening, was experiment with the processes don't work in a linear fashion any longer. Like, you can be almost done with the mix, and then someone has a production idea, and it's like, okay, we can put it in. Like, it doesn't change much. Like, go back to Joe's in the other room, add the element, blend it in, bring it back to Mike. Like, it was very fast, and that wasn't so common back then. Now it's as common as anything. It's probably the standard. But so that was a huge learning experience from a technology standpoint and from a creative standpoint, to just see how, you're never really finished with capturing all of the ideas you have. And as the music's evolving and your ideas are changing, it can all be implemented right up to the point where literally at that time, Warren, you can appreciate this. There was a courier standing there going, I'm bringing this to Sony Music, in 2 hours. So Mike, you print to these drives and I'm taking them wherever you guys are in the process. The records do, because there wasn't really email then.
No, I know. Talk about difference. It's a whole new world now. We just sound like those old guys, don't we? Like, oh, you kids don't understand how difficult it was.
No, you're right, but really, we're the old guys taking what we learned to bring innovation to the new way of doing it. Like, I'm not stuck in that way. I just took what I learned, and you and I have talked about this a lot off camera as the friends and associates we are, always talking ideas and things, geeking out, if you will. We've talked about this, where that it's not about to us what it was and how the good old days. It's about what we learned from it. And now when you take the modern potential, all of that experience factors in, and we can look ahead and say, well, if this is where that evolved to, where will this evolve to? And we can help speak to that and move the needle to where it's going. So it's almost the opposite of being an old guy. It's being a wise person that can look ahead and really speak to, how are we going to make things better and where is this going? And I think you had to have experience in the past to understand where the present is going. You have real reference points to it. It's helped me tremendously.
Yeah, I hear you. I have a friend that does, he was an Inferno artist. I don't know what the latest software is now, but basically he would do all of these incredible kind of computer generated stuff. But he's a lot older than both of us. And he started in visual effects when it was all like blowing up models and stuff like that. And he said a lot of his work is people come to him and ask him to do something, and he'll say to them, actually, it's easier and you'll get a better result if you do it the old-fashioned way. He knows how to apply the right solution to a problem. And I think that's the great thing about all of us that have been doing this for a period of time, is like, yeah, you can all, you have a lot of acquired knowledge, and you can solve problems using old school ideas. I hate that word, but I'm using it. Old school ideas all the way through to the latest and greatest and everything in between. As the old phrase goes, there's what was the thing? There's 1,000 ways to skin a cat or something,
Yeah, well, it's true. And if you want to know the road ahead, ask those who are coming back.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it comes down to. We've been back and forth on the road, and we've had a lot of experiences that, they all, every day in the studio or in the technology world, when I'm either building a studio or putting together a setup for a client or working on my own, it's every day I'm learning something. I mean, it's incredible that we are in a career and have a passion for something that's as artistic and creative as music is and technology is. And yet you never, ever get to the top of the final mountain, because every mountaintop reveals the bottom of another mountain. And it's just absolutely, I know it sounds cliche to say it's endless, but it really is. You're really learning and improving every single time you do it.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Talking of gear, what do you have in this facility of yours? Are you a Pro Tools guy, or do you or combination? Do you use lots of different DAWs? What's your preference?
I am a Pro Tools guy for the most part. I have Reason and Live, and I love them both and use them. But my typical workflow include, and I also have a Performer, which I really like for MIDI stuff. But Pro Tools HDX, I have an HDX3, which, as we're recording today, is the most amount of cards that I can put in it. They were promising additional cards, but it hasn't happened. So I've got an HDX3 in an Intel 2019 Mac Pro 24 core with 768 gig of RAM and an 8 terabyte SSD hard drive. Loaded up with extra USB ports. The Mac and HDX3 are connected to a Sync X, an Avid Sync X, an MTRX Studio, and an MTRX. And then between those two, and I have the MTRX configured with a good bit of AES and analog, and Dante, of course. And between those two, I can get the monitoring setup that I want to make Pro Tools essentially work like, between the S6 and the HDX3, it really works like any console would, or, however you want to envision it, where I could have proper monitoring through the Atmos setup and Genel X for my 724 are all Genel X with their DSP running GLM5 now, which we just upgraded to. And it just gives me the ability to have as much I/O as I need, and the ability to monitor, and the ability to monitor binaural through the headphones, which we do through the MTRX Studio headphones. And it's just a really, really powerful setup. We have a ton of plugins inside of Pro Tools. We're running the latest Pro Tools Ultimate software, which as of this recording, I believe is 2023.12. B, like there was like a little 0.1 that they did after they released the 0.12. So we're running the very latest, and we have a ton of plugins. I think we're up to, when the plugin count occurs, it's about 2,000 or 3,000 plugins. It's as many plugins as I can find. I'm a gearhead. I'm a total geek, nerd, gearhead who loves the gear and what it's capable of as much as I love the process of creating the music itself. And so every plugin that I read about that has any functionality that differs from, or sound that differs from what I already have, I add it to the setup. I've been doing that since when Sound Tools and Sound Designer 2 started supporting plugins back in what I want to say is the 90s. I don't think it was the 80s when they added plugins, but it's all kind of a blur. That's how far back I go with plugins. So I've, like gear itself, the hardware, I'm always adding and growing, and anything that, I think can be a good tool in the toolbox, I'll add. So now we're up to this insane amount of plugins. We have the APB 16, the Mac DSP, which works, as we know, with the APB plugins, and the UAD box as well for their plugins. So we're running the UAD natively with Spark, or we're also running it off of their DSP. And we have one of their, I think it's the most you can get. I think it's the 4 processor UAD, which is over Thunderbolt, as is the APB 16. And then everything from there, after we leave the box and we have, both the hybrid hardware, software, and the native plugins themselves, and the HDX plugins, we then go to the hardware around the studio. As I sit at the console at the S6, we have our DAD monitoring, which I know I could do that with the S6 as well, but I really love the speed of having the monitor controller here and being able to just switch sources and speakers so fast. And it works because everything comes off of a dedicated network switch. The S6, Dante, and the DAD, it all works in parallel. So we could use the S6 or we could use the DAD. And then we have we have physical controllers for the plugins We touched on it earlier, the 1210, all the TCs, every physical controller TC makes for over USB. We have the UFC 1 SSL, which I love. It's like a little SSL console controller with the mix bus compressor and EQ and the compressor settings for a channel right here. I love this box, and it's just really brings like the feel of an SSL with the plugin, and it's awesome. Coming from having worked on actual SSLs for a long time, this is a really cool piece, and it really does have a very SSL kind of vibe. We have NS10s as a secondary pair of stereo monitors, and then we go around the room. We'll start in the machine room, where we have some of the noisiest pieces of gear. And we have the aforementioned Mac. We have half a dozen 4 and 8 terabyte SSD hard drives hanging off of it over Thunderbolt. So we have plenty of speed and plenty of storage capacity. And then we have a Focusrite RedNet, which is primarily being used as another interface off of the HDX. So HDX thinks that there's another interface besides the MTRX Studio and the MTRX. We have the Focusrite RedNet off of the HDX, the DigiLink, and we have an H9000 also with a DigiLink card. So they're all connected to this computer, the Mac Intel Pro. And then we have real noisy, good old days outboard gear, the Yamaha SREV 1, the Lexicon 300, the Lexicon 480L, and the 960, which is fully loaded with the 2 engines and every option they make. The 480 has the AES option and also the latest software. So everything is like kind of maxed out. And that's, again, from gear acquisition, right? At the time, I was a beta tester for the 960. So I helped them develop that software. Lexicon, of course, was Boston suburb based. So they were local. At that time, I used to drive over there, and they would give me a new CD-ROM for the 960 to then drive back to my studio and put in. Like, it was so exciting. Like, that was the fastest you could get software updates. You remember those days?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, look, it doesn't seem that long ago that we used to have to like messenger everything or just FedEx it. You know, how long has it been since you could actually send WAV files for an album to a mastering studio, or from the mastering studio to the CD plant? I mean, I still think it was easier and better to just overnight stuff. You know, I remember Sony had a plane that went between LA and New York on a regular basis. And so one of your best options were, you know, this is like 15, 20 years ago, like we have to get the CD or the DVD, you know, with all the tracks down to the airport by 7 p.m. They're going to fly it to New York. Tomorrow's a A&R meeting, you know. Yeah. Nowadays, you know, you're just going to upload the files in like 1 nanosecond. But it was only 20 years ago that everything was a pain in the butt. I mean, obviously easy, but you know, it used to be in Jack's day, he would tell me things like, you know, you've heard these stories thousands of times of like finishing an album mix and then taking it down, or a single mix, and taking it to the radio station, and they would play it there and then. And then it would be like pressed the next day. You know?
Yeah.
Where there's a will, there's a way, is what I'm trying to say. We can always figure it out.
And when you take that approach, you know, it doesn't matter what the mechanism is to send the mix. You know, the attitude behind it is it's going to be on time or earlier, and we're going to figure it out. And it was the same way when I was doing beta testing. It was the same way. Like, you know, these software developers would need to know, you know, hey, did that work? Did that not work? Oh, did that feature end up in this latest version? And we would actually, from there, you know, we would have to, you know, figure it out fast and get it over. So the 960, I have very fond memories of helping that piece of equipment kind of come to life and evolve and turn into just a monster processor, incredible sound. It was the price of a car, right? But it was, you know, it's quite awesome. So I kept those pieces. They're in what we call the machine room here at Frangioni Media. And then we get into the room and we have the controllers for those pieces. We have the Lark and the Lark 2, the S-Rev1 controller from Yamaha. And those are all wired, and and then we have the TC Icon connected to a 6000 Mark II. We had a 6000. I worked on the 6000 beta team as well. At that time, Ed Simeone was at TC. I don't think he is anymore. I haven't talked to him in a while, but he was at TC for a long time, and we worked very closely together and helped develop and kind of evolve the 6000. So it was awesome. So now years later, the Mark II comes out. We upgraded it. So we have the 6000, and then we have all of this equipment, which I'll take you through as we start, from left to right, if you will. We have a 500 rack with 2 RMX 16 500 modules, 1073, Brent Averill, some modules there. We have a Rupert Neve, mixed bus compressor, and we have an MBC down below. We have a single channel up there, and then we have the MBC. We have TT 96 patch bays, all wired, and a digital patch bay for AES, which I want at some point to replace with a computer-controlled AES patch bay, because that's real old school, when I would patch all of those AES pieces to, just using quarter-inch TRS digital. We have the Pro Tools interfaces, power protection. Then the next rack, we have a Ublason Infernal, a 90, right? I mean, that's like a super rare piece. And we have the remote control for it, which is nearly impossible to find. I love the Ublason. What a unique sound when you use that. We have one of our 3 MIDI interfaces. So we have quite a bit of MIDI gear. So we have one interface on that side of the room for that gear, and we have 2 on the other side where most of the MIDI gear is located, but we had enough on this side that we had to use our own interface. It's connected over MIDI via Ethernet on that side, and those 2 are connected via USB. And then we have the AMS keyboard controller for the 1580. We have earback system. We have a SSL Fusion. And then we have another RMX 16, an actual full rack AMS RMX 16, and 2 SDMXs. I love the AMS DMXs for pitch shifting and delay effects. And I never had the S version. And then over the years, I was able to upgrade to get 1 S. And then later on, as I was able to upgrade again, because I always had 2 of them. And so one was just an older original DMX. And then I was able to upgrade the second one to the S. And those are just the best version they ever made of the 1580. Absolutely love those. A 1210, a Lexicon PCM 81, a Lexicon PCM 91, a Bricasti M7, an Eventide H9000, which, as I had mentioned earlier, is connected via DigiLink as well as Ethernet and as well as digital. So that we can get in and out of that anyway. It can look, Pro Tools thinks it's another interface if we want to configure it that way. If we want to just traditionally patch it, we've got all the AES hooked up, so we can just do it on AES inserts through the MTRX, because we have quite a bit of AES I/O on the MTRX, so I can patch it old school. And then we have our word clock setup, which Mutech is the master clock with an oven. With the 10 megahertz, right, feeding the standard word clock. The low end improvement over using the 10 megahertz versus just using the Mutech standard word clock is significant. It's very audible. You can A/B it, and there it is. Like, it's not subtle, especially in an A/B. So we've stuck with that. Makes a big difference in the sound of the studio, and everything is fed from the Tascam and the Mutech. That combination, they're all connected together, sample accurately, and all the word clock is fed to everywhere in the studio. So we're working off of one clock, and the master sample rate changes there, and then everything chases that as far as clock. So it's really eliminated any digital I/O dropouts, clicks, pops, issues, as well as, and just as importantly, if not more, improve the sound. So the word clock distribution, I've had word clock distribution in my studio in one setup or another for over 20 years. And it just, as these improvements happen in the chips and the clocks, we hear the difference in the setup. So that's a really integral part of the studio. And then as we go over, we have an RMX 16 remote, which I have to actually get fixed. But that's super rare as well, right? I know you laugh because when some of this stuff, it's a miracle when it works.
I didn't even know there was a remote for it. I never had one.
Yes, super rare. I know. It's the only one I ever saw that was available to buy, and I bought it. But it's got issues, and I've got to get it working. But I kept it in the studio because it turns on. It just doesn't control the 16, so I've got to get it fixed. We have the Bluey Black Lion audio compressor, single channel, great on vocals, great on different instruments. We have an AMS DM220, the phase simulator. Pretty rare. You see him here and there, but it's a pretty rare piece, and it's cool. Monster Power, a GML EQ, right? Been around forever. I think I've had it for 25, 30 years. It's absolutely awesome. And Neve 33609, same thing, been around forever. Another 500 rack, this one filled with SSL. So we have a 2-mix G compressor. We have an ultraviolet. We have a couple of VHD pluses. We have an LMC plus, and we have the Heritage Audio grandchild, the 670 and a 500. That's new to my studio and to the market.
And what do you think?
I think it's a great piece. I mean, having actually used a real 670, there's, it's not something you can replace, right? But you can get in the spirit of, and the closer you can get to what it really sounds like and what it does to source material or a master, is why you reach for it. And it gets us in the ballpark. I mean, it has a sound. It's definitely, it has the vibe. And I like it a lot. I think it's a miracle that for that price, in that footprint, we can get that sound, and they can get as close as they did for what it does. And I think, my approach is always to keep it real. Like, it would be fantastic to listen to a plugin or listen to a 500 series module of any piece of equipment and say, yeah, this was a couple of $1,000s and took 3 minutes to install and wire. And this is $50,000 and takes 2 years to find. And then you got to have a full-time tech fix it. And so I'm going to hear the one that's $2,000 or $3,000 with like a lot more positive energy. Like, this is going to sound great because this is like, or the opposite. I just spent a fortune, so this is going to sound great. I really try to close my eyes to that approach and not think about this is cost that or this is this or what anything really is in that regard, and let the music and the audio send me the message. Like, what is this? So when I listen to, if we take the grandchild as an example here, when I listen to it, I'm not trying to compare it to a 670. I'm trying to get a certain sound that I know the 670 creates. And that can get me in the ballpark and can make the sound. It gives me the Fairchild vibe. And it's great piece. So anybody who's into Fairchilds and doesn't have the budget and the means and the resources, because it's not just buying one, it's maintaining it, to have a real one, real being original, that's an awesome piece. And the plugin sounds really good too. So I'm really excited about what Heritage Audio did. I think it's groundbreaking, and I think anybody who's into Fairchild, that's a great piece to have. And then we have a retro compressor, a 2-channel GML mic pre that I've also had forever today, a Focusrite Red 8, a Bryan Adams 2-channel 1073, essentially, a 250, an old EMT, but that is called Dynatron. And I've had that thing for 20 or 25 years. At the time, that was the only way you could simulate an EMT with a close enough sound that it really was again, like we talked about the Fairchild, like an actual EMT. Well, we had one at Joe Perry's studio, right? But he had the space. So we could put the actual plate in a room and have an EMT reverb, as they do at Abbey Road, et cetera, et cetera. And I never had that kind of space and maybe not even the need for the kind of work that I do. So this EMT, the 255 is a really cool piece. AES in and out, great piece. I have the Bus Plus. I have a GML compressor. I always wanted a GML compressor. I always loved the sound of them. I got to know George Massenburg. He's just such a genius, an amazing guy. And I would talk to him all the time about it and ask him questions. And he would talk about, oh, this is what I did on, Aaron Neville or on, Earth, Wind and Fire, and talk about how he used the compressor and how it, what kind of differences it made to getting different sounds. And the compressors, it's a pricey compressor. And so it was always kind of last on my list when I looked at my budgets of putting gear together. And finally, I was able to actually bring one into the studio. I got it on Reverb a while back, and it's a great piece, and I love owning one. I have a Kurzweil K2500R, which we did the SSD upgrade. So we took the SCSI drive out, we put an SSD drive in, and then we got all the ROMs in there and the AES stereo sampling. Great piece. Kurzweil, I mean, they have iconic sounds. I've been a fan of theirs. I have a K250 RMX over here that we'll get to in a second. So that's kind of dates me back to the original Kurzweil sound. When I first heard their pianos and strings, I always just thought they not only sounded great, but they sounded just unique. Like that was even though they were sampling a piano and sampling strings, the way they did it and the way that the filters on the samplers and the output stage and everything just made for a very unique sound. And I got used to it, and I would reference it. And when I wanted that sound on certain records, I had to go to a Kurzweil to get it. So I had a K250 way back. And then I got rid of it because I had the keyboard version. It was very large and it didn't fit in the studio anymore when I moved studios. And then I recently got a K250 RMX because I always wanted to have the 250 back in my studio. And Steve Donato in Nashville, Night Sky Sound, he made it happen. He's a K250 master, and he found me the piece and upgraded it and cleaned it up. And now I've got essentially the equivalent of like a new RMX. It's a very rare piece to find a K250 in a rack. But in this condition, it took Steve months to, acquire it and upgrade it. So I'm really happy about having one of those. So between the 2500 and the 250, we've got all the Kurzweil sounds we can want right at the source. We've got a 4-channel ISA 428 Focusrite mic pre. I love the sound of the Blue Series ISA Focusrites. There's nothing like them. They're their own sound, but man, so often I reach for that sound. It's so versatile. It's so clean, has so much headroom. I just love the Focusrite Blue Series, iconic series. Again, it's one of those that we've been using for decades, and they just always perform so high level. We have a, Gasp cassette deck CD player with Bluetooth. And so we can kind of we have a turntable, so we can still play any of the legacy formats. And then we have the beginning of our MIDI setup, which is pretty vast. We have an Akai Force, we have a Jupiter XM, we have an SH101, System 1, I should say. We have a Jupiter XM, we have a System 1, we have an RD9, the Behringer 909. I had an original 909 for a while. Kind of drum machines kind of come and go in my studio. I'll keep them and I'll replace them. And so I'm always kind of changing drum machines, but we have the Behringer, and then we have 727 and 707s modified. So we have the Sound Gas modification where you can patch the different filters in, and we have the ROM banks where you can switch. It has, not only the 707 sounds, but it has Lynn sounds and other Roland drum machine sounds, and you boot it up into a different ROM. Really cutting edge for what they did. It's a very recent mod actually for such an old drum machine, but it's really turned those drum machines into really, really cool, creative, pieces that they never were capable of doing before. So those are pretty awesome. We have two of those. We have the 707s, and we have a TB3, which is the new version of the TB303. Now over here we have a Roland 808, which is also sound gas modified, similar to what they did in the 707, where we have filters and we can patch and MIDI, of course. And it's really taking the 808 to another place. We have Simmons MTM, which is MIDI to voltage. So the opposite of how it was done, where you go voltage to MIDI, right? You want to play the pad and have MIDI triggered. Well, this is the opposite. We want to play MIDI and have the pads, the modules triggered, because they didn't have MIDI. These are from the 80s Simmons modules. So we have an STS7 and two STS5s. They've all been modified extensively by Ed Rose. Anyone who's into Simmons, you got to get with Ed Rose, because he is a genius with this stuff, and he has modernized these Simmons modules, upgraded them. I can change ROM sounds. I mean, we can do things with these that no one ever imagined could be done. So I can actually use these pieces in 2024 and beyond in a modern workflow. And these pieces were dinosaurs, in the 80s by today's standards, but not with Ed's mods. So they've been heavily modified. So now we have MIDI. We have the potential to change the sounds. They've been cleaned up. They're great. I have a Timbaland B Club MPC Live 2, which is a limited edition piece. We have a Juno X that we use as a sound, a sound source, but mostly as a controller. There's the K250 RMX, our mini interfaces, an Integra 7, another TR-808, but this one modified by Real World, by David White at Real World Down Under. And it takes 2.5 years to get it modified. So so it's a good thing I have so many drum machines. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. When you
2.5 years.
With 2.5 years. And so you're without your 808 for 2.5 years. And it's just, part of it is it waits for him to have time to do it. Robin White is the gentleman's name. And part of it is for it to, for him to have time. And part of it is just how long it takes. And he's just a genius. And he just adds so many things to this. You'll see it on the video here when we get up close with it. It's just remarkable. Then we have all of our hardware controllers. So similar to what we have for the plugins, where we have, an 8210 controller and a TC2290 controller and all the things we talked about. Well, that's what I have for the synths. So these pieces, Soundforce, right? Nicholas at Soundforce. I'm sure a lot of you guys know him. He makes these hardware controllers. So we take, for instance, we take a Juno 106 soft synth, and now I'm controlling it like I did in the 80s, when I actually had a Juno 106, right? So this thing is so awesome. And it's for a Moog, it's for a Jupiter 8. We have our rock solid audio SSL hardware controller, again, USB. We have a Synclavier Regen, which I always dreamt of having a Synclav and never got one. There's a lot of stories and reasons, but you remember in the day,
of course,
right?
Yeah.
We'd have to live,
These
we'd have to
days.
sleep on one. They were $250,000 to start when they were, and you fully configure them and you hit $500,000 in the blink of an eye. So at that time, I would have, it was unattainable. And they were very complicated to use, huge space footprints and machine rooms and everything else, but they sounded incredible and they did things that no other, piece of technology could do. So I always have loved what they were capable of. And this regen is just amazing. Like, I cannot believe that is truly a sign of what has occurred in the evolution of music technology, going from where the Synclav was in the 80s, for example, to where it is today. And yeah, it doesn't have the hard disk recorder and the other things the overall Synclavier 2 workstation had, but we don't need any of that stuff anymore. You know, that's all grown into other lanes. But the sound source and the hybrid sample and FM and the way that they, created these sounds, that's in there. And it sounds amazing. And I love the piece. I have two of them, actually. And then we have a Push. The latest Push just came out from Ableton. A Dynacord Ad 1 with floppy disks. I haven't updated that to SD yet, but it still has floppies. It's 8-bit, but it sounds incredible. And it's got a fat sound that when you want that particular sound, there really isn't anything else like it. We have two drum controllers here, a D-Drum Neo and an SB-DSX Pro by Roland, so I can play directly into it. Obviously, being a drummer, that's something I use quite a bit. And then we have two racks of additional drum machines and controllers. We have a TR-09 by Roland, a machine drum by Electron, an Access Virus. We have an MPC Renaissance, a TR-8S, an RD-8, an S2400 by Isla Instruments. We have a TR-08, a JP-08, a D-05. We have Machine, and we have a Drum Loop Impact, and we have a Moog Big Bottom Bass. And we have one of my all-time favorite pieces that is another dream come true. We have a Fairlight Series 3.
Oh, wow.
Oh, man, I always dreamt of a Series 3, even more than a Synclap. I always wanted a Series 3. I was always enamored by the sound, by the way that it worked. Now, in that day, in that time, in the 80s, nothing worked like it. And today, nothing works like it, for better or for worse. But back then, nothing worked like a Fairlight. Nothing sounded like it. Amazing. We had 32 meg of RAM. Like at that time, that was, 8 times anybody else's capacity. Hard disk, hundreds of meg of hard disk storage. So anyway, long story short, I got the Fairlight in Australia from Horizontal Productions, and really there's two guys that are Fairlight masters. There's the guy at Horizontal, and there's Andre, who just reissued the Lindrum as the Luna 1. He's absolutely incredible. I love Andre, and he's just a genius and a great friend. And so between those two guys, I got this Fairlight. We upgraded it with the SD card, so we're not using old school SCSI hard drives. The Fairlight thinks they're old school SCSI hard drives, but they're not, right? So it runs great, and it's it's one of those things that once you know where to go for the sounds and how to kind of integrate it into a certain type of music or production, it's incredible, right? And so I had them over the years. I always wanted one, and I finally found one used years ago, and then I moved and sold that one, and then found a different one. So I got a lot of hands-on experience with, what to look for and what the ultimate machine would be. And then finally, between Peter at Horizontal and Andre here in Northern Cal, we were able to get this machine, and it's just a great Fairlight Series 3. And then we have some great mics. We have a C12 VR. We have a Warm Audio. And with all of that, the S6, the Pro Tools HTX3, the Gel-X speakers, we can pretty much do anything that we want in here other than recording multiple instrumentalists or drums, live drums. So we can do just about anything else but that. So what that means is that I'm doing, a lot of immersive audio mixing, a lot of Atmos mixing, production, pre-production, overdubs, editing, mix to picks, all the typical stuff that you would imagine that a control room could do. And I'm always reimagining and kind of looking at the studio and thinking, how do we make it better? What can improve? What can give us more sonic palette? We just, I think you'll run out of ideas before you run out of gear here.
That's absolutely superb. What's your mic selection?
We only have a few, because all I'm really doing here, I want to say this for context, right? Because I'm very passionate about microphones, but owning them and having them in my possession is something that, has to have a reason, right? What am I actually recording? So I have the warm audio Neve knockoff, if you will, and I have an actual C12VR. And those are the primary two vocal mics that I go between, because it's really vocals that I'm doing, or maybe some sound effects, voiceovers, all like vocal based kind of stuff. That everything else is done virtually. And that's why I have these incredible sound libraries. I've got these amazing sound libraries from Spitfire and East West and a number of other companies in the box that are just phenomenal. What those guys at Spitfire are doing and what East West has done, you just have these sonic palettes that, whatever you need, right? I need foot stomps, in this part of the production, or I need a tiger roar that turns into a helicopter and modulates, because that's what's going on the screen, or that's this unique sound we have to create for this piece of content. And there's just everything's there, and it sounds incredible to start. And then you've got all these tools that you can use it to morph and to create whatever you're hearing, as the end result. And that's what all this stuff is for.
Amazing. Well, that's a great philosophy. It makes absolute perfect sense to me. David, thank you ever so much for taking us through everything. I've got to come out and visit you sooner rather than later.
Yes, please. You're always welcome.
And you were talking about, right at the beginning, you were talking about Atmos stuff. Are you doing a lot of redoing records that you made yourself, that you were involved in sort of the 90s and early 2000s? Or are you just bringing on all kinds of different kind of work? What are you working on in Atmos?
It's a combination. It's a lot of catalog work from labels, reimagining. As we all know, Apple pays a higher royalty rate when the songs are in Atmos. So I think that's motivating a lot of labels to convert their catalog into Atmos. I love the sound of it. I've been involved in mixing surround since 5.1, which at that time was in the 90s. And the main driver at that time was Dolby Digital for video-based content that used 5.1 as the audio, and DTS was into kind of 5.1 audio only, and that was the origin. So I got a lot of experience in just the setup, the monitoring, the bass management, like all of the things that are the fundamentals of surround mixing, both for music and for mix for picks. And then it's evolved now, over the years, 5.1 to 7.1 to now immersive and primarily Dolby Atmos. Or Sony 360, but mostly, in my case, Dolby Atmos. And I'm mixing it for all kinds of artists. We just mixed the Kiss record, their first album, into Atmos to celebrate the 50th anniversary of that album. We're getting great reviews. Charles Dye worked on it with me. And it's just, an absolute, great. We were able to make the record really sound like it was, a modern version of that raw sound that it is. Atmos really brought it to life in a different way that still has the integrity of the release, but is a lot more, just current sounding, if you will, the sonics of it. And it brought out that the playing, that band was just cooking, right from the first album. They were hungry and playing great. And they'd been touring already a lot, so they were tight. And it was just a great project to be a part of. So we're doing a lot of Atmos. I love it. I'm super passionate about mixing it immersive, and it's really, really an exciting time to be in the studio.
Absolutely. David, thank you ever so much. I really appreciate it. This has been a real blast. Of course, everybody, there will be a link down below where you can check out David's studio and some of his credits and all other kinds of fun stuff. And of course, don't forget to go and check out Modern Drummer. David, you rock.
Thank you, Warren. You rock. It's great seeing everybody. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you again soon.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks a lot. So long, Phil.
Bye.
Auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, ciao, goodbye.